Right, well, thank you all very much for coming along to this session. It's the third session in the series, and we're going to be talking about the important subject of wing control today. I've opened it up to other clubs on the basis that it's such an important topic. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Steve Milson. He's very kindly offered to come along this evening. Steve's been flying for over 30 years now. He's the South East Wales chair. He's also the safety officer for the club, BHPA Senior Instructor, tandem pilot, and a BHPA reserve packer. And there's really not a lot of things about paragliding that Steve doesn't know. He's been there, seen there, and done it all. So welcome, Steve. Right, so what we'll talk about today is wing control. What can happen in active air? Why do collapses occur? The benefits of training. We'll talk about the 4 fundamentals of active flying. And we'll look at some of the things that our wings can do in the air. So roll and pitch. We'll look at collapses. We'll look at cascade events, where we can get further information, a brief look at reserve throwing, and basically why preparation matters. So before we start, I'd just like to get something into context. This isn't instruction. I'm not an instructor. I've been flying for about 4 years now, so I've only got about 200 hours, and I've still got very much to learn. I've done about 8 days of SIV training. I've had 3 trips to Colombia, 1 trip to India, to northern India in the Himalayas. And so what I've done is I've tried to put together everything that I've learned over the last 4 years from various courses, videos, books, and my own flying, and try to structure it into something that's useful. So don't take this as this is what you should do in a collapse. For that, you need to go to an SIV course with qualified instructors. Think of it more as a way of trying to understand what's going on and maybe give you some things to think about and work on in your own flying. So what I'd like to do is to start off by showing you this video. It looks a little bit dramatic, but it's a very useful example of something that can actually happen when you're flying in active air. So it took something like 8 seconds for that pilot to get the wing under control. And it's important to say that this could actually happen to any of us. You know, you're flying along in very still air, it's beautiful scenery around you, and something happens that you're not expecting. The glider does something all by itself without any inputs from you. You may not recognize what's actually happening to the wing. Now, I don't know whether this pilot had actually done any training, but if they had, any responses they could have had were delayed. And it's quite natural in that situation to fall back to your natural responses. And in this situation, pilot inputs can make the situation a lot worse. So I'd like to just ask a poll of what would you do if the wing is behind you and is about to shoot? At what moment would you actually brake? Okay, so the results show that the most popular answer was 50% of you have said at the vertical when the wing is above your head. And interestingly, if we look at the FlyO results on the right-hand side, which is a poll that's taken when you do on that online training portal prior to looking at any of their videos, that's right at the start of the course, the most popular answer there was also at the vertical when the wing is above your head. The FlyO results, the second most common one, was at any time but with different brake amplitudes. And no one has actually said that. And that is actually the right answer. So we'll look at why that is later on in the talk. You can also answer this question as well. When should I release the brakes after catching the dive? So the dive has started, the wing has pitched in front of you. The most popular answer there is when the wing has stopped, which was also the most popular answer on the Fly EL poll and is actually the correct answer. But we'll look at that in more detail later on in the talk. Why do collapses occur? There are 3 types of turbulence that causes collapse. One is mechanical turbulence, where you've got wind coming over terrain, going over ridges to create rotor and lee side turbulence. And the best way of avoiding that is not to fly into that area. And you can use your instruments for that to identify what the wind direction is and look at your ground speed, as we talked about in the last talk on instruments. So you generally try and avoid flying into those areas. The second one is rising air, thermals. If you're going to fly in thermic air and fly cross country, you are going to be flying in very turbulent air. So you could quite easily get a collapse. And the third instance of turbulence is wind shear. And this shows an example, typical of the Alps, where you get a valley wind and the meteor wind, which is going over the tops of the ridges. And where those two meet, you can get wind shear. You can also get it in the UK winters. And we talked about it on the when we looked at weather, where you get cold air in the valley and inversion. And then at that inversion, you get a wind shear below and above. You can also get it in the Alps in the evening when the anabatic and katabatic flows are starting to reverse, and you can get a flow coming up the valley and the cold flow coming down the valley. So you might be coming to land in the Alps late in the afternoon and hit some wind shear. One particular nasty type of turbulence is where you get rotor and turbulent downwind of buildings, and then you immediately have a thermal which takes that turbulence up into the air. And I had a situation a few years in Colombia where I was trying to find a thermal over a brown field. There weren't many places to land, but I was trying to find a thermal coming off this brown field. Eventually I couldn't get it, so I ended up having to come into land. Fairly restricted area to land in. And I was about 10 feet off the ground. I was out of the pod, so my central gravity was over the balls of my feet, and I was at about 10 feet. And then in an instant, I hit the ground. I was doing a PLF and rolling around in the dust. And I suspect it could have been that downdraft from the thermal, but I suspect it was a mixture of turbulence and thermic air. And just to rub things in, when I was dusting myself off, there were 3 black vultures above me thermaling out. So if you're coming into land with a high ground speed, and this is assuming you're facing into wind, then turbulence is not likely to be an issue. But if you're coming into land with low ground speed, in other words, the wind is high, you need to be really quite aware of what's in front of you and any turbulence. SIV training is a central part of our development, because basically flying well in ideal conditions just isn't the same as being prepared for when things go wrong. And it builds an awareness of and a real understanding of what your wing is capable of doing and how can you react in various situations. But importantly, it actually prepares you to manage situations where you just don't have the time to think about it. And it doesn't matter how many hours you've done, whether you've done 5 hours or 500 hours of flying, there are real benefits to going on an SIV course. And there's a saying that you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. And what SIV courses essentially give you is you experience real flight scenarios, but you're in a very controlled environment, a relatively safe environment. And you're starting to build instinctive muscle memory of how to react quickly when things go wrong. And as a result of that, it reduces your panic response. And this is what Malin Lobb, who's an instructor at Fly in Annecy, actually in Dussard, which is on the southern tip of Lake Annecy. And you can read it for yourself. But he's basically saying SIV is just another course you go on to get better. It's an extension of your basic training. And everything that you actually gain from that course, you can transfer to everyday flying. And as a consequence, it will actually make you a better XC pilot. So that's Malin's view of SIV. And where do we start? Well, like a lot of things, you start off with the basics. And there's 4 fundamentals of active flying. They call it SIV fundamentals, but they're not basics you need to know to go into an SIV course. They're fundamentals of active flying. And there's a very good article in XC Mag that was produced a number of years ago. When I did the course at Fly-O in Annecy, there's a whole load of pre-course training that you do on their online portal, which isn't open to the general public. But when this guy, Andre Bandara, I guess you would say he's an influencer, when he actually did the course with Flyo, and he produced 4 videos of the fundamentals, and they were so good that Malins actually put them onto the Flyo portal. But those videos actually exist on his own YouTube channel. So you can go in and look at those 4 fundamentals and the 4 fundamental videos. So the first fundamental is you trust your harness, and it's all to do with having a base of support. And some of the examples that people quote is if you lie on your back on the ground, you've got a really good base of support. It's very stable. If you were to walk a tightrope, you've got a very small base of support, and you'll be trying to use your hands all the time to control your balance. But a better analogy is a racing car driver. If they were going around a racing circuit sitting on a round ball, they're not really going to be able to use their hands effectively to steer them around corners and stuff. They're just going to be holding on for dear life and trying to stop themselves from falling off the ball. So giving them a good bucket harness with straps on gives them a very good support, firm base that they can then use their hands to steer the car. And it's the same with paragliding. If you actually lean forward on your harness, you're going to be using your hands all the time to try and balance yourself, particularly as the air is getting very turbulent. And the trouble is your hands are connected to the brakes, and that's going to have a very significant effect on how the wing behaves. So it's far better to lean back in your harness and feel the pressure on your back. So you've got a really good base of support, and you can use your hands to control the wing. Start flight, doing longer flights, 1 hour, 2 hour flights, and you start feeling when you land that you've got a very sore stomach muscles. It's probably because you're tending to lean forward as the air gets a little bit turbulent. And the other thing that's worth saying is bending your legs as soon as you hit any forms of turbulence and stuff also reduces the chances of getting twists. And pushing your knees out also increases your base of support. So on an NSIV course, as soon as you start going into doing these maneuvers, you bend your legs and you widen your knees a little bit. So this is a picture with a wing that's behind the pilot, behind me. And you don't sit forward in that situation, you actually lean back. And you can do this when you're on general flights, local flights, soaring flights. You can just ask yourself the question, am I leaning back into my harness, and see whether you can feel the pressure on the back of your harness. The second one is dissociating your arms. And it really goes against our natural instinct, because if we actually fall over on the ground, either forwards or sideways, the natural instinct is to put your hand out to stop hurting yourself. And that same instinct will happen in the air if you haven't trained for it. So you really need to learn how to dissociate your arms and trust the harness. And when we actually lean back into the harness, you can feel a lot more support, and it feels more natural to as you feel as though your body's falling, to let the harness support you and not move your hands around is a real key. Then the third one is using the full brake range, and that's from 0 to 100%. And the 0 to 50% brake range is actually very crucial from a wing recovery point of view. There are some instances in paragliding, particularly when you're doing stalls and stuff, where as if you have any brake pressure on the wing whatsoever, it will go into what's called a parachutal mode. And that's basically where the wing almost stops flying forward, and it's just like a traditional parachuting round canopy that's floating down. And it fights our natural instincts, because we're in a stressful situation, we want to hold on to something. So as soon as stuff starts happening in the air, there is a tendency to pull some brake. And you really just got to have the confidence, for example, if the wing is gone behind you, to put your hands up and let the wing do what it wants to do, which is fly. So when the wing is behind you, put your hands right up to the top of the brake range. The other end of the brake range is equally important. A lot of pilots don't want to go anywhere near the stall point, but there are some recovery situations, for example, if you have a really massive pitch forward, where you have to use a lot of brake, and it can be up to 100% brake, either on one side if it's a rotation, or on both sides if it's a frontal. So if the wing is shooting down in front of you, it's okay to put your hands fully down to the bottom of the harness. You will not stall the wing. The other thing that's really important to say about using the brakes is while you're flying around in nice calm air, you can put your hand right out in front of you and move the brake handle down. And you could put it out to the side of you and move it down. In the wild, if you get a collapse, you need to do two things. You need to push the brake right the way down to your harness, below the bottom of your harness, past your hip. And the force can be so strong that you wouldn't have the power in front of you to pull the brake lever down. And secondly, the maximum brake range you have if the brake is in front of you is limited. You need to actually put that brake right by your body and down by your hips and push it down in order to use the 100% brake. Because otherwise, you may if the hand is out in front of you, you may think you're applying 100% brake, but you might only be applying 50, 60% brake. So you've got to get used to keeping the brake handle close to you and pushing it down. And if it gets really hard, what you can do is to put your elbow above your wrist and give you more force to push the brake down. And there's a good analogy there with the dumbbell. And the final one is situational awareness. And basically, without it, you won't know where you are. You won't know what's happening with the wing. You won't know what to do. So situational awareness is a key element of handling collapses in the wild. And you can only gain that. You can only gain the situational awareness from training. And I can remember when I first started doing my SIV maneuvers in Annecy, all I could think about on those early rotations was the G-force, and also that I was going around faster than I would ever have done on my own. So you know it's safe because you're being told to do that, and you're being told on the mic, carry on, keep going. But that's all you're really focusing on. And yet, say on the second day when you're starting to get much more awareness in the air, you're looking up at the wing to see whether it's dimpling because you're trying to go into a rotation too quickly with your brake. You're looking around you while you're going around, even on things like rapid exits and auto rotations. The instructor tells you to look around, see how many boats you can see in the water, and your awareness just becomes a lot larger. You actually know where you are in that 3D space. You know where the wing is. You know whether you're rolling, the wing is rolling, or whether the wing is pitching, and you know what's going to happen next, and you know what to do. So it removes all the surprises that you're likely to have. And the final one there is our mind also controls our physical actions, and we'll just touch upon that at the end of this talk. So roll can be quite complicated to master. If the wing is actually moving up, you can limit the roll by pulling the brake on the upper tip as it is moving up. So the right side, say your right hand side, limits the roll, but once a roll has actually occurred and it's starting to go back the other way, you can cancel the roll when the lower wing tip is moving up. So you limit on one brake, and then once you've gone over to the other side, you cancel on the other side. So you cancel the roll when the lower wing tip is starting to move up. And every turn you ever do on a paraglider, or every time you exit from a rotation, are you in thermic air, it takes you off your roll angle. And being taken off your roll angle is really inefficient. And therefore, managing that roll and also pitch, but managing roll is a really fundamental part of flying. And it's something that I'm trying to work on a lot more now in my thermaling, to try and get efficient at thermaling by trying to make the wing go up the thermal as though it's on rails and not have the tips moving from side to side. It's also very effective if you're doing a transition from one side of the valley to the other to make the wing fly efficiently. So trying to manage any roll in the wing, even if the brake movement is only an inch or maybe 2 inches, might mean the difference when you get to the other side of being in the valley flow, where there's very few thermals kicking off, or being higher than the valley flow. Pitch control, you can actually catch the pitch anywhere during the shoot forward. The wing is right behind you. You can put on a little bit of brake, but you have to hold that brake the whole time the wing is pitching forward. So all the way through the pitching until it stops. So you apply a little bit of brake for a long time. If you wait until the wing is overhead, you have to apply more brake but for a shorter period of time. And if you're really brave, you cannot apply any brake whatsoever until the wing is right the way in front. And there you apply a lot of brake for a very short period of time. So you catch and release very, very quickly. And it's always important that once you've stopped the wing from moving forward, that you put your hands up. Because if you don't put your hands up, as you swing back under the wing and preload the wing, that wing will stall. So you can use, at this point, with a big chute, you can put 100% of brake on for a fraction of a second and then release it. The thing to be aware of is in the back pitch, if you apply too much brake, and it could be a part of a fear response that you know what's going to happen and you don't like it, and you want to slow the response down by braking a bit earlier, a bit too much earlier, what happens is you slow the wing down and your body weight will go under the wing and reload it. So you reload the wing when it's behind you and you will have one almighty chute. So it's far better to be brave, and when it's behind you, put your hands up and just let it pitch forward. And I remember on my last SIV course, which I'd done, day 6, day 7, I was getting very, very confident, and I was basically doing a lot of aggression on the rapid exits, and there was a lot of back pitch, and I can just remember leaning back in the harness, putting my hands right up to the pulleys, and sort of saying to the ring, right, let's see what you've got, and just letting it shoot forward. And the great thing about our ENA and our ENB wings is if you let them shoot forward, they dissipate their energy while they're shooting. So the catch is relatively benign. But if you try and hold it early, but on too much brake, you make the situation far worse. So you can only get that experience by doing an SIV course. But when the wing is right behind you, you put your hands up and you let it pitch forward. And when it's right in front, one deep brake pump and then release. And the SIV courses, they like you to catch much later at the vertical or slightly after, because if you brake too early, you can cause a wing to go parachutal. The timing is important. So where do we start in terms of emergency procedures? Well, a really good starting point is the standing operating procedures that the BCC, the British Club Challenge, have generated. The BCC is endorsed by the BHPA, and it's a low-level club entry competition, and it allows club pilots fly cross-country, even after the recent clarification of the rules last year. And it's a fantastic document. There's 5 pages of bullet points. So it literally will take you less than 5 minutes to read. And it gives you everything that you need to know from the basics to implement for various types of emergency procedures. And we will come on to that as we go through the talk. So a frontal collapse. Why does it happen? If you fly straight through a thermal, you've got a lot of air rising up into the center of the thermal, and you may have sinking air on the outside of the thermal. If you fly straight through a strong thermal, you can just imagine the back of the wing going up and the front of the wing going down. You will have a frontal collapse. If you go into a strong thermal, it will pitch the glider back and it may shoot forward. If you don't catch the chute, the wing may also collapse in front of you. And it can also happen out of the blue when you're flying around cross country due to wind shear or turbulence. It can just happen. And the standard operating procedure says if there's a lack of brake pressure, one swift sharp pump on the brake. If the wing is deformed, so it's assuming it's right above your head, tuck your legs under, put your hands up, and if it dives, catch the dive. Now our ENA and our EMB wings they say they've got passive safety, which means that in theory, you don't have to do anything. And so if you were to let an ENA or an EMB wing pitch forward, it may frontal collapse, and it will generally cover on its own, provided your brakes are high enough. So that you could argue that's passive safety. However, you don't really want the wing to do that, because it could come out with a cravat, and that could lead to a cascade event in rotation. So if you see the wing pitch forward, the best course of action is to catch the dive early to either limit or prevent the frontal. In practice, if you have a collapse and it's right behind you, you could even punch it there, but you have to be very careful if you do that. So you catch it as the wing pitches forward. So I'd just like to show you a video of a collapse that I had back in May 2024. And what I think caused it was at the time I was flying way out front in the valley, in front of the ridge. My wife was actually back on the ridge and she was flying in a straight line and going a lot higher. So I basically came back to the ridge. When I first had this collapse, at the time I thought it was sheer turbulence. On the sounding that day, there was no signs of indications of turbulence. There was no indications on the topography and the terrain that there would be wind shear. So on the day that occurred, I basically went back to the ridge where the lift was, and I think that what the situation was there were the thermals, instead of triggering out in the flats, they were being blown along the ground, and they were possibly triggering at the edge of the wood. There's also behind the wood, there's also thermal sources and triggers, and there's a lot of rocks down at this end of Nanty Mole, and that was potentially another source for thermal. So you had thermals kicking off here, but it was actually quite windy at this part of the day, and you had turbulence in the wind going up. And I think that's what actually caused the collapse on that particular day, mechanical turbulence combined with thermals. Asymmetric collapses, they can be caused by turbulence and rotor, and it's the most common type of collapse you'll have when you're flying around in thermic conditions. And they can also occur if you don't catch a dive. It can come out of a dive with an asymmetric collapse. Inexperienced pilots, particularly, it can be quite dangerous if you're close to terrain, can tend to concentrate too much on the collapse side and even lean into it, causing a turn into terrain. So it's always really important to do the right thing and lean away. Wings can actually fly with a 50% collapse or even more. So just because the wing looks fairly collapsed above you is not really any reason to panic. So the standard operating procedure says that if there's a loss of brake pressure, one swift sharp pump on the collapse side. If the wing is already deformed, you can weight shift away from the collapse side with a light brake pressure to turn away. So it's always important to use more wake shift than brake, because if you use too much brake on the good side, you can actually cause a spin. And the important thing is to maintain heading and fly in a straight line. Get into clear air, then you can try and clear the collapse by punching it out. If you're way away from the terrain at thousands of feet in altitude, there's nobody around you, there's no terrain. If you see a collapse, just punch it, immediately punch it. Even if you start to go into a slight turn, just punch it out. 100% brake travel all the way to the bottom and back up again, and you'll find it will release very, very quickly with minimum change in direction and height loss. So I'd like to show you another video. This time it was the collapse from Blorange. The reason why that collapse happened was I was trying to get a thermal above Langors Mountain, and I was frustrated that I couldn't actually get a decent climb. So I knew I was going to have to land. Rather than take the safe option and fly away from the terrain, I actually flew northeasterly in order to land close to the road. And if you look at the left-hand picture, I knowingly flew onto the lee side. You had air coming up the valleys. I knew that from my ground speed. My ground speed was high, so I knew I was flying downwind. I could tell from the thermal marker trace on my instrument that I was flying downwind, and I knowingly flew into this lee side. You've got air coming over the top of the mountain rotor. You've got air coming around the side here. You've also got a col between these two peaks with air whipping around the side. So I knowingly flew into this area of lee side turbulence just to end up landing close to the road. If I was faced with the same situation again, I would just fly straight out into clean air in front of the ridge. The height times the wind speed in miles per hour is a distance downwind in meters where the turbulence will have dissipated by. So roughly 2 kilometers downwind from that, it would have dissipated. Some people replace the wind speed in miles per hour by factors of 10, 20 and 30, depending on how strong the wind is. So you get turbulence a long distance downwind, which is why flying in the mountains really can be quite dangerous. So I set myself the limit of 10 miles an hour at 10,000 feet. So 16 kilometers at 3,000 meters if I'm flying in the Alps. More experienced pilots will tend to fly winds a bit higher than that. So that was my own fault. A spin is caused by one side of the wing stalling while the other side continues to fly. You can get them by flying, for example, on a fast downwind soaring beat, and you decide to use both brakes to slow down, and you get to the end of the ridge and you want to turn back, and you use a brake to turn around, you can cause it to spin. The BHPA, when we did our coaching talk, said that that's a very common occurrence for newer pilots. You can also do it when you're trying to land. You might be going downwind on your landing pattern and you decide to slow down for some reason, and you slow down on both brakes and then you put one brake down to turn back into wind. That can also cause you to spin. When you're entering a thermal, if you only use the inside brake and you don't weight shift, you'll get thrown out by the thermal, and we'll talk about that on the next talk. But you'll get thrown out by the thermal, and you may feel that you need to apply more brake to get into the thermal. That can cause you to spin. Once you've had an asymmetric collapse, as we've just talked about, if you use too much outside brake on the flying side after the collapse, there's less weight shift and more brake, you can also cause it to spin. So the standard operating procedure for that is just hands up and catch the dive. Our wings have got 6 degrees of freedom. So X, Y, Z and rotations about all 3 axes. So on the X-axis, left and right, and the rotation axis is pitch. The Y-axis is forward and back, and the rotational axis there is roll. And the Z-axis up and down, the rotation axis there is yaw. A car, in a comparison, if you ignore the taking off on a humpback bridge and you ignore the pitch caused by suspension and roll. A car, for example, has only got 2 degrees of freedom, forward and back, and yaw. And what these 6 degrees of freedoms mean is that when you put energy into a wing, it can do all sorts of stuff. And a good example is a rapid exit, where you might go into a spiral using the left-hand brake, and then you go back onto the right-hand brake to come out the spiral. And once you've started coming out of the spiral, the wing will start to roll. So you have to use the same brake that caused the spiral in the first place, the left brake, to stop the wing from rolling. Once you stop the wing from rolling, it will pitch right back behind your head, and then it will shoot forward. So all the energy that you put into the system to cause a rotation, if you come out of it very quickly, which is not something that you would normally do in real world, but in a SIV course, you come out of it very quickly, and you can demonstrate then that you can stop the roll and you can catch the pitch. And when I did my first SIV course, the thing that really surprised me was when I went to do a spin. I was getting used to catching the pitch from the relatively small pitches that I'd induced by coming out of a rapid exit. But when I did the spin, and all you have to do there is push the one brake down a lot, you feel the wing go and spin backwards. You let the hand up, both hands, if you've gone slightly down on the other brake as well, you let both the hands up, and the wing does this almighty pitch forward. And all you do is you just lean back and you catch it. Just doing the spin movement causes enough energy in that 6 degrees of freedom to cause a rapid pitch forward, which really quite surprised me the first time it happened. Stall. Why does a stall happen? It can happen because you're flying too slowly and you get hit by a massive gust. If you have a high angle of attack when you're entering a very, very strong thermal with too much inside brake on, that can potentially cause a stall. If you go into a very strong thermal and you get a sudden upward surge, that can equally cause a stall. And the standard one is to have your brakes too low. What happens in a stall is there's very little wind in your face, the wing falls back behind you, and it looks very, very distorted. So the standard operating procedure there is lock your arms fully down. When you have a stalled wing, you do not want it to pitch forward because you'll have this almighty shoot. So if the wing is actually stalled, you need to lock your arms down. Tuck your legs underneath, wait until the wing has come back overhead, and only at that point to lift your hands up. If it dives, you can catch it. And the prevention there, the tip there is avoid flying too slowly, too defensively in thermals, because as they hit you, you could end up stalling the wing. And if you do get a strong pitch back in a thermal, for example, put your hands up. Cravat is a cascade event. Cascade events generally are things that the pilot is allowed to happen. And a cravat is where the wingtip is either blown onto the front of the lines or it's wrapped inside the lines. And it can quite often occur following an asymmetric collapse, and frequently it occurs during stall and also stall training when you're doing an SIV course. Cravats can very, very quickly put you into a spiral dive. Cravats aren't something you can induce on an SIV course, but somewhat ironically, if you're doing negative maneuvers like spins and stalls, it's quite common to get a cravat. And to be honest, it's the safest place to get one because you're under instruction, you're in a safe environment, and you can be told how to get out of it. The standard operating procedure is to weight shift away from the entangled side to maintain heading, light pressure on the brakes to hold the heading if necessary, and then attempt to clear the wingtip with a stabilo line, which is a great way of doing it because the line goes straight to the outer end of your wing. So it's good to know what the colour is of your stabilo line. Then the SOP says if the cravat will not clear and the roll is manageable, gently turn away from the entangled side. If it will not clear and you require more than hard brake, throw the reserve. The priority is to stop the rotation and maintain heading. And there's lots of different versions of how to deal with cravats, from deep punching on brakes to big ears, grabbing the slackest line. Just be aware that if you have a big cravat, there's going to be a lot of slack lines around. And if you do grab the stabilo line or the slackest line, you're going to have to wrap it around your wrist in order to try and clear it. But the stabilo line is a really good first thing to go for. If it's a classic cravat where the wing has gone in front of you, if you can imagine, the air is pushing the wing onto the lines. So the easiest way to get out of it is to induce a spin. And I had a cravat on my last SIV course coming out of a wing over, and the wing started to turn. So I leant to one side, put a little bit of brake on, and then I just put a spin in. Simple spin, and it came out instantly. If you have a large cravat, there tends to be less turning effect, and the smaller cravats create a lot more turning. So you can get a small cravat, which can lead to a rotation very, very quickly. But if you have a very large cravat, the brake pressure will be so slack that you can't get rid of the cravat. And the only technique that will clear it will be a stall. So if you have a two-liner where there's fewer lines and a high aspect ratio wing, it's very, very easy to get a cravat. Having the skills in your toolbox to spin and stall out cravats is really a very, very good tool to have if you fly two-liners. Our low-end wings, ENAs and EMBs, are less likely to get a cravat. And to induce a spin, all you need to do is push that brake down and hold it until it spins. It's much more efficient to do that than have pump it 3 or 4 times. An auto-rotation has occurred because the pilots let it happen, and it can occur following a cravat, and asymmetric collapses result in a spiral which goes nose down. Incorrect recovery from a stall can also cause an auto-rotation. The wing will not recover when the brakes are released. Malin Lobb in Flyo says this all the time, widely considered as one of the leading causes of fatal accidents in paragliding. An interesting thing about an auto-rotation is the inside tip, the clap side goes high, and the outside tip, the flying tip, actually goes low. And so what happens is the wing goes in one direction and you fly in the opposite direction. The central rotation moves from the end of the wing down towards the lines, towards you. So you end up going backwards. And you're effectively turning around a centre which has got shorter lines. So you'll find the G-forces and your descent rate is a lot lower than it is in a spiral dive. And the way to get out of an auto-rotation, the only way to get out of an auto-rotation is to apply the outside brake. If you apply the outside brake and it's not having the desired effect, it's like flying into a tree on your paraglider. If you apply the right brake to miss the tree and that you're still heading for the tree, you don't try and do something differently. You carry on applying the brake, but more of it. Exactly the same thing with an auto-rotation. If you apply the outside brake and you push it down and it doesn't have the desired effect, keep pushing it down. You may find collapses in the wild tend to be a lot more aggressive than on an SIV course. So you need to make sure that your elbow is above your wrist and push down really hard. If you struggle pushing the brake down, then you let the other brake go and use 2 hands on that brake handle to push it down. Malin Lobb showed a video on the course about somebody using both hands on the brake to get out of the rotation. You can weight shift to the outside of the spiral as well, but it's more important to use the outside brake. It's also important that the other hand does the opposite. And it's also worth knowing that as you bleed the energy off, you'll get a massive pitch out and dive forward unless you ease off on the rotation gradually, or even you go back into the turn in order to reduce some of the energy. And interestingly, this shows that if you put the right brake down, the right wing tip is down as you're going into the turn. But on the auto-rotation, the right brake is still down, so the wing is still rotating in this direction. The right tip is now high, and you're actually rotating around this axis here. And I had a cam with me in Turkey, and it showed in this auto-rotation, the earpiece radio lead came out, and you can see the earpiece is actually going forward. I'm going backwards, and the earpiece is actually going in the forward direction. So as the manoeuvre develops from a spiral towards an auto-rotation, which the acro guys call it a SAT, because it's a similar type of motion, the center rotation moves from the wing towards the pilot and you start to fly backwards. In terms of online material, I've watched probably over 1,000 hours of video content, and these 2 masterclasses by XC Mag were by far the most valuable resources I've found within the last 4 years. The videos used to be available on YouTube, but they've now been taken off. You can get access to them on the cross-country XC Mag website. You can pay something like a £4 monthly sub, which you can cancel after a month. You can pay the sub and get access to those 2 videos, which is about 2.5 hours. There's also a 2.5 hour video done by Malin Lobb with Avon Paragliding Club, and absolutely brilliant. Now, a lot of the questions that are asked on the SIV courses with Malin are covered in this video. So it's another 2.5 hour session. So 5 hours of really valuable material on collapses in the wild. Greg Hamilton has done a very good one outside of the academy on 5 simple safety rules. Got videos of my first SIV course from the ground, and the latest course that I did in Turkey. I had a camera with me, so it's a very interesting perspective from the ground, but also what it looks like in the air. And I've covered some of the maneuvers you'll do on your first SIV course, like rapid exits. It also covers stalls and backflies and high-speed collapses. And here are just some of the really fantastic quotes from Malin Lobb. Being passive when the wing is being aggressive is just as dangerous as doing the wrong thing. Passive safety means nothing. You should see every collapse you ever have, and you should punch every collapse you ever have. If you were to look at XC flying, SIV course and ridge soaring, you might think that an SIV course is the most dangerous. But in reality, an SIV course is the safest thing you can do. You're in a controlled environment, it's a laminar flow, you know what's going to happen because you're going to do it, you know how to react. If all goes pear-shaped, you throw a reserve out and you land in nice soft water and you're picked up by a boat. The second most dangerous thing is cross-country flying, because you don't know it's going to happen. And if you do happen to throw a reserve, unless you've got a steerable reserve, which most of us won't have, you could land on something that could potentially kill you when you fly, you get blown off the side of it. And the most dangerous type of flying is ridge soaring, because you're always in proximity to other pilots, you're always in proximity to terrain, and particularly in times like spring now, you could get thermals coming through, and you're going to have a collapse close to the ground. So the most dangerous thing you can do is ridge soaring, and the safest thing you can do is go on an SIV course. There's a brief slide here on reserve throwing. You might throw your reserve because of a gear failure, a mid-air collision, or loss of control. And there's three things that you can do before you throw your reserve if you've got the height. Turn towards the open side, and that can quite often resolve many of the asymmetric collapses. You can also go into hard brakes. If you really don't know what's happening, but you know you're rotating, you can just go into hard brakes and see what happens. And then the last resort, before you throw your reserve, just put your hands up for 4 seconds. And a lot of SIV instructors will tell you that people on their courses, at the instant they throw their reserve, they let go of the brakes or put them into one hand, go for the reserve handle. They've let the wing do what it wants to do. And as they throw the reserve out, the wing inflates. I had a recent collapse in Colombia in January where I had a massive frontal. I was fairly close to terrain because we were scratching around for thermals. I had a massive frontal followed by a massive asymmetric collapse. And immediately after that, the wing was still all over the place. It was a complete shit show. It was pitching, it was rolling, it was probably yawing at the same time. And I just put my hands up. I didn't want to get into a situation where I was doing the right maneuvers, but late. So in that particular case, I put my hands up and the wing recovered. And I went on for a nice long flight after that. But if nothing's improving, the G-forces are increasing, you have no idea what's going on, you don't know what the wing's doing, you're running out of altitude, throw the reserve. And if you've got a descent rate of 15 meters a second, which could be even higher in a spiral dive, if you've got a descent rate of 15 meters a second, from 150 meters, you're going to impact the ground within 10 seconds. So you need to set your hard deck relatively high and then decide if you pass that, you're going to throw a reserve out. This is quite an interesting slide. In case two experienced pilots. There was a very nasty accident at Melt Hill White Horse a number of years ago. The guy was a senior instructor, tandem pilot, senior coach. He had a frontal collapse of 22 meters. It was analysed by an SIV instructor afterwards, the video. He didn't react accordingly and he hit the ground. The one on the right is even more frightening. This guy's done 4 SIV courses. He's flown 1,400 hours, 200 hours a year. He's done 270 stalls. He had a frontal collapse, albeit on a high-performance wing, Ozone Zeno. Cravated and auto-rotated. The collapse was reviewed by Malin Lob. It took 33 seconds to recover. You might think, well, if it can happen to them, how on earth am I going to manage a collapse when it happens to me? And this is why preparation really matters. I've got a skydiving background. There aren't many things from skydiving that you can transfer to paragliding, but there are a couple of things that I've mentioned there. And the one that's most important in the context of this talk is visualization. And skydivers visualize throwing a reserve, which you might have to do once every 10 years or once every 5 if you're unlucky. But we actually visualize our jumps. In a competition, you have 35 seconds to perform a high ladder maneuvers in the air. And we do loads of visualizing these jumps so we get it right on the day. In terms of paragliding, you're not going to visualize a flight, but you can certainly visualize throwing a reserve, which you may never have to do, but you can visualize collapses. And visualization is something that I've done over the last 40 years on lots of my outdoor activities, and I've carried it across from skydiving into paragliding. And astonishingly, nobody talks about it in paragliding. None of the online influencers or coaches talk about it. The only time I've ever heard somebody talk about visualization is Malin Lobb on the pre-course videos that we do before the course. And he talks about visualization and he goes into it in a lot of detail of what it actually is. So what is visualization? It's not about watching yourself in a video. Watching yourself and somebody on a video have a collapse helps you, give you clues that you can visualize what's happening. But visualization is all about seeing it through your own eyes and experiencing it in first person and engaging all your senses. So you can just do it now as I describe it. Just close your eyes and just think that you're flying across country. You're at 4,000 feet. You just visualize the harness pressure on your back. The seat plate might be uncomfortable beneath you. You can feel the brakes in your hand. You can feel the cold airflow on your face. You can hear the vario bleeping. You can hear the wind noise around your helmet. You might hear the wind rustling. You might smell the grass coming up from the thermal. Nowadays, in the UK, you might smell some slurry coming up from the field. You might see some leaves coming up in front of you, or birds flying, or debris. Then all of a sudden you get a collapse and you hear it. You might hear it rustle first and you'll feel the collapse through your brake pressure, through the seat board. You'll feel it through your harness. The harness will throw you around a bit. And you'll look up immediately and you'll see something. And you just feel yourself leaning back in the harness and just feel yourself applying brake pressure and seeing the wing tips starting to come apart and you see the wings recover. And you just fly off normally. And that would be the end of the visualization. And if the more vivid you are in your visualization, you're tending to engage neural networks in the brain, and the brain retreats the visualization almost as though it's done the real thing. So if you've already mentally experienced a situation many times before it happens for real, there's a much better chance that your response when it happens will be calm and deliberate, and it will be effective rather than panic-driven. So the first time you ever experience a collapse should not be the first time that your brain has ever seen one. And I'd just like to finish on this slide. The biggest collapse I've had in my flying career, apart from a recent collapse I had in Colombia in January, I turned up to fly at Longmind. It was a very windy forecast, so a whole load of us got there early morning. We walked lower down on the hill, which Longmind is a safe place to do that. And we all took off lower down and had a flight, and the wind picked up. Everyone that turned up later, from say 10 o'clock onwards, couldn't fly. Most of the pilots in the air had landed. There were 3 of us left in the air. I was the second last person to land. And I came into land. The top of Longmind is flat. And I wanted to land quite far back from the ridge edge because I wanted to land close to the road. And so this diagram is showing that at the front of the ridge, you've got lots of lift. And just a little bit further back from the ridge, you've got laminar flow. It's high speed because of the Venturi effect. But on this particular day, because it was so windy, the wind was coming right over the ridge and coming back down further behind the ridge. Now, this isn't traditional rotor because there wasn't a sharp edge. It wasn't a knife edge ridge. It's a nice flat top. And I was coming to land and I was about 200 meters off the ground. I had the most almighty frontal. So I banged both brakes down, got it out. It was then followed by a really large asymmetric collapse. I banged that out with my left brake, recovered from that, and I landed without any incident at all. It was witnessed by loads of people in the landing area. When I got back to the landing area, the pilots that were there said that I'd done a really good job handling the situation I was in. This incident occurred at 36 hours. It occurred 3 or 4 weeks before I was to go on to my first SIV course. All the recovery procedures I used had only been visualized. And on that thought, I would just like to finish the talk. Hello, are there any questions?
Question, Chris. Good evening. It's Sherwood.
Hi, Shane.
Good everyone.
Hi.
See a slide previously, and I suppose this is a question for me. Is a really newly like CP and lowest time pilot is how slow is too slow when you're flying? So when you're talking about either on from minimum sync slow, or left around minimum sync. It's just to try and give particularly me confidence when I am doing, as an example, downwind into winds. How how much brake am I applying beforehand. I don't want to create that spin as a result because they've got too much brake on. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Certainly, any form of turn, because of the 6 degrees of freedom our wings have got, is going to introduce roll. Therefore, it's always a good idea to lean weight shift first, then use the brake. That will, to some extent, mitigate the risks of a spin. How deep is too deep? Steve, I don't know whether you can help out here. Whether half brakes is okay, or is it only a third brakes? Generally, I don't turn when I'm on brakes. I will always be on brakes will be high, and I will weight shift and then use one brake. Steve, would you like to come in on that?
Okay, it's yeah, it's a good question, Shane. But the reality is you're very unlikely to spin your glider. Um, if you use weight shift, it's highly unlikely. It's very, very hard to spin in a normal turn unless you're holding it on um, with your brake in a fairly low position. However, the position is always relative to what your airspeed was kind of when you're going into the turn. And so if you start off slow without any energy and then you slow the glider down anymore, then the chances are of you hitting that spin point are more likely. But as we taught you, you have feel in your controls as well. I mean, using weight shift is your best defense against spinning. Um, but you should know from the feeling of your brakes, because as soon as the glider starts to spin, you lose pressure in the control on the turning side, and the brake starts to feel mushy and soft. At that point, you just whip your hand back up, and you won't spin. So you don't really have to worry about it. It's a bit obvious unless you're just ham-fisted. Um, I've seen low air timers spin very unexpectedly and quite easily when they weight shift the opposite way. So be very careful that you always weight shift the way you're turning and don't counter what if you're doing a right turn, don't lean over to the left because you can get spin really early if you do that. So your body position is always super important. So always get the weight shift in first, the side that you want to turn to, and then bleed in the amount of brake that you need. Yeah, you don't see many people inadvertently spinning their gliders these days unless, as I say, they weight shifted the wrong way. So I wouldn't worry about it too much.
But they are certainly useful. Thanks, Steve.
So-
Yeah, yeah. We should come on. Get the brake pressure start getting softer than mushy.
That's your last.
Thank you, Steve. Certainly, that's the experience I had from an SIV course. When you spin the wing, you're told to come back. Say you want to spin it to the left, so you put a little bit in order to make the spin easier to initiate. You put, say, a third of brake on the right hand side on the outside, and then your left brake comes down, and you have to move it quite a long way, and you start to feel a resistance, say about half to 2/3 of the way down. You feel a resistance, and then as you push through that, it goes very soft and mushy. And you'll immediately know you've gone into a spin because your shoulder goes back. And it's at that point, unless you want to start doing helicopters, that you just put both hands up, and recovery is very, very straightforward. You just get a pitch forward, which you catch. The issue is just how much brake input do you need. If you're on half brakes, 50% brakes, and you start to go into a turn on that side, I think I just wouldn't do that. I would my brakes would generally be high, and I pulled down on one brake to go left or right, after I've done some weight shift. It is relatively easy to spin if you come down onto 50% brakes and you start using the other brake to initiate a turn without weight shift.
Weight shift is your friend.
Yeah, but yeah, good question. Thank you, Steve.
I've got a bit of a simplistic idea of it in the moment. I mean,
See, I like to think about it. If the wing is behind me, I'm going to go hands up. If the wing is in front of me or about to go in front of me, that's when I start to catch it and try and not go crazy with that. And then I've never really messed around my stall point in promotion. And I think you said when you stall, you do it. So if I was in a stall, I'd imagine the wing would fly behind me. I'd keep moving forward. And at that stage, my natural reaction would be to stand up until it's nearly above me. And I'm hoping it's going to reinflate. And then I'm going to catch it. But did you say I have to slam the brakes down first, and then
Yeah.
it will reinflate, catch it again? So it's two pulls.
Yeah.
Is that
So
right?
yeah. So generally, if the wing suddenly goes behind you, going into a thermal, it's hands up. And if at any point the wing is shooting, then you would start to initiate the catch when it's at least above your head or slightly in front. But you can wait until it's much further forward to catch it. But if you actually do go into a stall, say you initiated the stall by accident and you had your hands too deep, the last thing you want to do is let your hands up. I've only ever done that one skydiving when I had no idea what the wing was going to do. I was at 8,000 feet and I thought, oh, I've got plenty of altitude. I'm just going to stall my wing. And I stall my wing and I just put my hand straight up back to normal level. And my God, I thought I was going to fall into my wing. And I never, ever did that again. So if the wing has stalled, you need to go down on the brakes, just like the standard operating procedure says. You have to hold the wing down and keep it behind your head. When the wing starts to come back above your head, you can then slowly release the brakes and then catch the pitch. But if it stalls and goes behind you, do not let the brakes up because you'll get an almighty surge forward.
When I should. So it will sort of reinflate. I'm visualizing. Whilst I'm holding the brake behind me, it's going to be obvious that, now it's time to release the brake and try and catch it again.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of energy involved in a stall. So certainly with Fly.io, they won't let you go anywhere near a stall until you've demonstrated all the basics and understanding, catching and awareness. And there's a lot of energy involved. And if you hold the brakes down, you've got to have them down by your side. And it's quite a lot of pressure required to hold them there, then keep them there. One of the biggest problems is people are asymmetric, whether it's by leaning or with the hands. You have to be completely symmetric, and therefore it's a lot safer. And you can hold it in that position. The wing will sort itself out, and you can play about with the brake position, and the ears will come in, the wing tips will come in and out, and you're trying to find the optimum, what they call the optimum backfly position. But you can hold that. And if you look at the video that I referred to, you can see me on that video messing about with my brake position to try and find the optimum backfly position, which is the first thing you do before you do a stall properly. That just shows that you can hold that position. And I'm looking around at my brake hands to see where that brake position is. You can fly and backfly quite happily. And then from there, you can let your hands up slowly and then catch the dive.
Okay, cool. I hope it only happens when I do an SIB.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just say something there? Just learn your stall point. You don't have to go on an SIV course to learn your stall point. You can learn it almost every landing you do. So, you come into land, and for most of you, you'll find initially, particularly on light wind days, the wing will just end up overflying you and end up in front of you, which means it's been nowhere near the stall. As you get more experience with landing, particularly in a little bit of wind, you can go deeper and deeper into the brake for your final flare at a few feet off the ground. And, you might fall backwards onto your butt or something. Don't do it too high, but you should learn that stall point on landing. And so you know what it feels like when the brakes just go to mush, when they're right down there. It's just before your feet have touched the ground. And that's when, is a really good way of learning the stall point repeatedly. So you don't need to go on an SID to learn that point and learn the feeling of stalling your wing.
I think I've been building up to that because I've been trying to do that sort of practice. But yeah, I'm a bit scared of sort of, still like you said, stalling too high up or maybe going back up and then smashing into the ground. Yeah, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, if you're having problems with that, just bleed the speed off as you come into land, just a gradual flare, and maybe with a wrap on, and then at the end, you just literally push it right down and make it stall just before you begin. And for the little wing landings, it's the best way to land. I mean, basically, if you can stall a foot off the ground, you're gonna have a almost standstill landing in no wind. So that's where you really hone your skills on stalling a glider and not really trying to, hopefully you won't go near a full stall in the air until you're on an SIV course.
No, thank you very much for that, Steve. Any other questions while we've got Steve here?
Hi there, it's Sophie here. I haven't got a question. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much. That was interesting and it's a good recap for me. I've actually been in the situation you described of stalling it in extremely strong thermal. It went behind my head in a tiny little ball, and I put my hands up, and it resulted in quite a dive, extremely aggressive, into 3.4G auto rotation, and I ended up throwing. So yeah, that's very good advice. Really, my experience. I did it wrong.
Thank you, Sophie. That's great, because I've certainly never encountered a stall going into a thermal. I've never seen one on all these videos I've watched, and I just wondered how realistic that actually was. So yeah, thank you. So yeah, scary, I should think.
Yeah, I was in Colombia, so you might have been in the same place where it was. It was extremely strong, and 4 collapses in the same area on the same morning. It was quite strong.
What would you do if you was faced with that situation again? What would you do differently, do you think?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't be so overconfident. I've learned not to be stupid. I had around 100 hours, and I thought I couldn't collapse it. And second of all, what you described there about learning how to full stall it.
Yeah. It seems like it's counterintuitive, really, isn't it? You're told throughout your paragliding career, don't go too deep on the brakes because you can stall it. But somewhat ironically, if you do get into a stall, that's where your hands should go, into the stall position.
Yeah, I had no idea. I learned very quickly afterwards. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sophie. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Steve. Valuable input.
If I could just say one more top tip from me, is that doing SIVs is great. Obviously, it's closest to a real situation you're going to get. But again, for people that maybe don't feel the confidence or have the funds or the time or whatever to go and do SIVs, one of the best ways of getting the kind of wing control that you need to stop most of these situations happening, and if they do happen, to actually have the right input and at the right time, is ground handling. And ground handling, and I'm not talking about, I can get the wing over my head. I'm talking about so that you can ground handle like a ninja, so that you can, in gusty, thermic, snotty, rotary conditions, you can go out there and keep that wing inflated above your head. Whether you need to go to the full stall position or put your hands up, all those timing things, you will learn a lot more from just doing hours and hours and hours of ground handling. And I just see so many low airtime pilots who all they want to do once they've left school is fly, 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 fly. But the best advice I can give you is, particularly when it's not flyable, is find somewhere safe and ground handle, ground handle, ground handle, ground handle.
In high winds. You're saying do that in high winds, Steve.
Sorry?
Ground handling high winds. Yeah.
In thermic conditions, in gusty conditions, in conditions that you wouldn't fly in on a flat field, then you really will learn your wing control. And it's one of the best things that you can do, is be great at ground handling, and not just think it's a technique that gets you off the ground on a windy day, because you just can learn so much more from just doing tons and tons of ground handling. So that would be my passing thought to everybody.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. That's fantastic. Our next talk will be on thermals, real paragliding. So look forward to putting that session together.
Cheers, Steve.
Right.
Cheers, Chris.
Thank you, everyone.
Catch you later.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers.